This is an I Am Listening exclusive podcast.
You know, I think it's really important to have that dialogue, to learn, to get new ideas, all the things we could be doing differently, all the stuff that we've talked about today. Your Member of Parliament and your politicians should be open to those discussions. They should be open to having those conversations, and they should be open to listen and learn from the people they represent. And that's what I promise to do.
Hello and welcome to this little mini-series with me, Kaylee.
And me, Liz.
This is the Tread Lightly podcast with the Rainham Eco Hub. And in this mini-series, we are delving into local politics.
With the general election just around the corner, we hope that you find this episode interesting and insightful as we interview the MP candidates for Gillingham and Rainham about their policies and their thoughts on all matters relating to politics and the environment.
Hello and welcome back to the Tread Lightly podcast with me, Kaylee.
And me, Liz.
And today we have the wonderful Naushabah from the Labour Party, who is running in this general election for Gillingham and Rainham. We're so pleased that you have taken the time out of your, well, I want to say frantic, mental, crazy time of, what did you call it? Your
campaign trail.
Your campaign
that's
trail.
It, yeah, that's what we call it.
You got the right lingo going on
yeah,
there.
It sounds all a bit faffy, doesn't it?
It sounds a bit American.
It does.
Campaign
I think
trail.
it might have been taken from American. Like, we've stolen lots of things from America now when it comes to politics.
Yeah.
And, you know, like all the big boards and the branding that didn't used to really happen in UK politics before. So yeah, maybe I've just stolen it.
I like it. Take it.
Go
I
with
would.
it.
We are really pleased that you have come and chatted to us, because I guess, like, for most people, when you are deciding to vote for somebody that's like that's a big job that you're going to go for, right? Like, people kind of want to know, policies aside, that's like over here, but like as a person, like, who are you and what is your story? How? Tell us all.
Tell us all. Well, okay, so do you know what? I've never been asked that really. On most interviews, you don't really get asked that. They go straight into the politics. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, they're always like, what do you stand on this? So it's always really interesting to just be asked a little bit about your background. Yeah. So I'm a Gillingham girl. So I was born and brought up here.
Oi, well done.
Born in All Saints Hospitals, which is technically Chatham, but, you know, there we go. So yeah, this is, you know, where I grew up, where I went to the maths school for sixth form, and this has always been my area. And I remember sort of going to school and then thinking I'm off to university, and being really excited about leaving. And I was just like, I can't wait to get out of here, because, you know, this is such a small place, and, you know, the world's my oyster.
And where did you go to uni?
I went to Birmingham.
Okay, so you went to a big city.
Yes, I did, yes. And I did history, and then I did law. So I left Medway, and I remember being like, I can't wait to leave. And then pretty much after I left university, I came back to stay with my family, and I just realised that actually this is where I want to stay, and this is where I want to try and do something different in the community and make change. And rather than complaining about where I grew up, I want to try and shape where I grew up. And that's kind of how I got into politics. So I came from a sort of political family, in the sense that we've always voted and we've always talked about politics in our house. And for me, my biggest inspiration is my dad. And he's always been he's such an encouraging father, really supported me. And he was really into, you know, I remember watching the 97, this is really geeky.
Geek out, we love a bit of geek out.
I remember watching the 97 election results with him while I was at primary school, and also going to school the next day and asking kids who their parents had voted for.
You
I'm sure they just thought,
they were like, what are you talking about?
Please go away. Yeah, they're like 11 years old. They're like,
like,
shut up.
They were like, World Cup, maybe, but
yeah.
Did you not stay up all night and watch it? No, I didn't.
No, I didn't. Funnily, our parents made us go to bed. Yeah. So my dad and I, like, my dad's always been my inspiration. He passed away 4 years ago. So
I'm sorry.
For me, it's, you know, some of this is about making him proud as well.
Doing it for him, yeah, that's cool.
But I realised pretty quickly that if you want to enact change, if you want to do something in your community, if you want to really push for it, it's got to come from the structures that govern this country. You know, I've done work with charities. My background's in housing and homelessness. I worked for a national homelessness charity for a while, St Mungo's. I don't know if you...
Yeah, I've heard of St Mungo's.
Yeah, so I've done a bit of work. I've done quite a bit of work for them, and that's sort of my area and my expertise. And you learn really quickly that there is a limit to the work that you can do in those spheres, and actually actually, really, if we want to sort of move things in the right direction, if we want to bring about that change that we need in certain areas, or all areas really, then politics, good or bad, is how you do it.
All roads lead to politics in the end, right?
In a way, yes. Yeah. And, people might get switched off by that and they might think, what are you talking about? Or it's all rubbish. And I understand why people feel that way, because I'm not sure politics covers itself in glory all the time. But actually, if you look at the decisions that they made and how they impact people's lives, whether you agree with them or not, that's where it's happening. And so if you want to get the right decisions, that's where you've got to influence. That's the way so for me, that's what I learned. And that's what got me, I just thought to myself, how can I do that? And it was the Labour Party for me, because I'd grown up from a family with not a huge amount of money, and a Labour government had made a big difference in my family life. And it was because of the Labour government and the parents that I had that I have a different life to the one that my parents had when they were growing up. So that's what got me into Labour politics, and probably why I'm sitting here today.
That's really interesting.
So the 97 election was probably quite a big election for you then.
I mean, I was 11, so at the time...
looking back, though, as being that's the moment that stands out for you in terms of a general election, and that was the year that Tony Blair got in.
It certainly was transformative for my family. I noticed a difference. I was a child, but I did start to see things moving and shaping and changing for my parents. And so, but it wasn't until I got to university that I myself got involved in the political party. So, through those formative years at school, politics was happening around us, and there were lots of big events that happened during that period. For example, 9/11, the Iraq War, which as a Muslim girl growing up in Medway was really interesting, and it had a huge impact. But it wasn't until I got to university that I actually joined the party and then really started thinking about myself in the political sphere. And it is a strange world, and I think we were talking earlier about you have to be a certain personality to do it. I think that's true, you do. Because you have to be, it's not easy. Like, I really found it quite challenging at times when people say mean things about you. And this sounds, might sound a bit strange, but when people say things about you in a way, they sort of depersonalize it because they don't know you, but they'll talk about you in a way as if they do. And that's quite hard to read sometimes. And I think it does impact people, but you have to grow that resilience. You have to kind of realise and understand the issues and the comments that you should take notice of and the ones that you shouldn't. And
which ones are just cruel and unkind as opposed to ones that come from a place of frustration and not being heard. And I guess there's a big distinction between the two.
Absolutely. And I can understand why people feel angry or upset.
I agree.
And you've got to be able to talk to them about that, and you've got to be able to unpick that. And sometimes you do talk to people about it, they open up a bit, and a lot of it comes from frustration where they feel like they've tried every avenue and nothing's worked, and they're upset because of that, or they feel as though the structures and services in this country, which should have been working for them, have stopped doing that.
Haven't, And I guess in that sense, that's when it becomes personal and unkind, but it doesn't come from that place. And there's a big distinction between those where there's perhaps a story that sits behind it, albeit it's still not acceptable, and the ones that are just there to have fun and troll sitting behind a keyboard, I guess.
Exactly. And the most I get, Labour has had quite a big social media campaign in this election, and I'm sure people would have seen some of mine.
My son was playing a game on his iPad, and when I said I was meeting you tonight, he said, ask if she likes, I can't remember what the name of his game was called, something like Stealth Masters. He goes, she likes Stealth Masters? And I was like, no, I don't think she deliberately advertises in the breaks between Stealth Masters, but that's what he wanted me to ask you. Do you love Stealth Masters? Please say yes.
I want to say yes, because I don't want to disappoint him, but I also want to be an honest politician. And say I've never heard of it.
Sorry, son, she doesn't like Stealth Masters.
It's not that, I've just not heard of it. But so some of the stuff I've got recently, for example, today, someone saying, why do we never have Indigenous white people standing to represent us? I get a lot of racism, and some of that has come off the back of the campaign, because people feel that, you get that exposure and then they feel they can say what they want to you. So that's been a bit challenging because, for me, I see myself as Gillingham girl. I'm really proud of this country and it's my country.
Of course.
And so that's quite tough to see sometimes.
And I think stuff like that is completely unacceptable. And I think the conversation around people saying things online, I think we've had experiences where people have been kind of quite vocal about elected members, and being able to share your kind of view on maybe, something that's quite relevant to you or like important to you is one thing, and being able to voice that to them, but you need to be able to do that in a really respectful and kind way. There's no point in what did you say, trolling? Like there's no point in, you know, doing that stuff, because no one's going to listen to that. That's just completely not.
Yeah, and I think we've had some experience of people that, even from an environmental space, will kind of what I would consider to kind of troll or bait. But having these conversations, we'll quite often invite them along to Green Drinks to come and have a conversation. And 9 times out of 10, it comes from a place of frustration that they're not actually actively going to sit there with their 3-litre turbo engine on the drive on for a couple of hours just to kind of pee someone off. Like it comes from a place of frustration, which I think is a really valid point.
Interesting what you said about the route to making change and kind of doing that through a political sphere. One of the questions that we had, and I'm going to read it so that I don't get it completely wrong, was last week we spoke to a guy called Phil, and he was from Christian Climate Action, and he was arrested for protesting peacefully with a sign outside a courthouse, and he shared with us that the context of which he protested is prohibited from being shared as part of his defence. And his context was being that it's 50 degrees in Delhi at the minute, which blew my brains, and I don't necessarily read the media, so I was like, thanks for telling me that, Phil. Now I actually do know that it's 50 degrees in Delhi. And he was saying they've got restricted water, piled up bodies of loved ones and dying from heat strain, and that's caused by climate change. And yet the most polluting companies and governments are failing to take action. One of the questions that came up after we was having a conversation about that was, what would you do to help people locally in Gillingham and Rainham have a voice about these issues that they can see happening on a big scale like in Delhi, but also like locally with local flooding and, you know, air quality being a big massive thing. Like not everybody has been called to be in the politic world. I'm so grateful that I have not been called to that, but I still want my voice heard, and I still want to be able to see change and enact that in my community. So how can I ask you, like, how are you going to be able to amplify those voices?
Well, I think it's just that, isn't it? That your representatives are there to represent and amplify those big issues that you see in your communities, and wider than that. And I think climate change, the future of this world and the globe, not just our country and where we live, has to be the number one issue. And we've got people talking about it in so many ways. We've got young people constantly saying this. It's probably the number one issue that comes up when I speak to people who are at school.
What, in Gillingham and Rainham?
Yeah, in Gillingham and Rainham. If you go and speak to young school children, they're always saying, what about the future of our planet? Which is so powerful. I'm really pleased about that, because that's the next generation and they are taking it seriously. But unfortunately, we don't have the time to wait for them to grow up and be running the country. We need to do something now. So I think the job of an MP is to amplify those voices, to talk about them powerfully. You have the platform, and we need our politicians to be talking about this not only in our parliament, but also in all the opportunities that they have to publicise the big issues. So you do get more exposure if you're elected. Certainly if you're a member of parliament, you do get those opportunities both in the press, both with and in the structures that exist in our parliamentary system, you know, through all the different groups on a cross-party basis. It's not just all about party politics. And this should be one of the top issues that any member of parliament should be discussing and talking about, and it impacts everybody. So of course globally we can see the impact of what's happening, but I've had recent meetings with local residents about flooding in their area.
Yeah, it's a huge issue.
It's a huge problem.
And it's a real worry, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a real problem. And some of the residents were saying to me, like, we weren't sure, this hasn't happened in recent years. This is, in the last sort of decade, but it's recently becoming much more prevalent because we have things like flash flooding. And that's what happened. And the structures that we have, the systems that we're working with at the minute aren't designed to deal with that level of climate change. So I also think on a more localised level, there is a real opportunity for the council, for example, to lead from the front as well. And I know that there are lots of things that the council are looking at, particularly having someone in charge of climate change as a councillor, which is the first time ever for Medway. Councillor Simon Curry, we'll give him a shout out because he's so passionate about this. He really cares, and everything that we're doing as a council has underlying and underpinning it this conversation around climate change. That's how you start to embed it. And I think the other thing for me that's really important is to not just look at this from a negative perspective. So of course there are big challenges we face. There's big challenges we face internationally. There's big challenges that we face as a country when it comes to this. But I think part of the issue we have is we've got to bring people on that journey to see and recognise that when we talk about climate change, when we talk about some of the big problems that we're facing as a society, but also across the globe, it doesn't all have to be simply pinned in being negative. It doesn't simply have to be, well, that means you can't drive your car anymore or you can't do this anymore. Actually, there's some opportunities here. How do we create those jobs and opportunities for the next generation that are underpinned by a new way of looking at the world, that are underpinned by green jobs and, you know, allow you to bring your skills and skill set into an arena that in the past we wouldn't necessarily talk about. So I think it's about that transition and sort of trying to win some hearts and minds through that. And I think it is the job of elected representatives to be leading that from the front.
And I think also for me, like for such a long time, it has always been like an institution or a big organisation that have got the answers, that they've got the solutions. And I kind of want to push back on that really and say, actually, local people in local communities that are already organised within their areas, they live it, right? And I'm not saying that you don't live it, but like they are having the effects of this happening locally. So they are probably the best people to ask for solutions, to get them to sort of start thinking about what it is that they can be doing, and then asking, what do you need from me? Or not necessarily you, but, you know, what do you need from the institution as a local authority? What can we be doing to help you in that? Rather than, this is what we're doing, this is the way that it's going to go. Because
do it.
And do this. Because those times are like, in my mind, and I know I'm just one individual, so I'm speaking for myself, but like those times are gone. It needs to be empowering local people to say, right, okay, I hear you. Now tell me what you need me to do and I will empower you and enable you to take as much action as you possibly can. Because in Rainham, we've got so many local heroes that kind of roll up their sleeves day in, day out, that do stuff not because they want to, they don't want to be in this climate crisis, but they know that they have a responsibility and they want to kind of share that and share their skills and share their talents with other people. And I think it's just around just reordering the power within that.
Completely agree. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because you're so right. It's about empowering communities. It's about working collaboratively. That politicians do not have all the answers, but what they do have is the ability to unlock and open doors.
100%.
And that's how you work together
100%.
to get the answers that you need and embed those. I can't pretend to you that I'm an expert on everything. I'm not. I don't think it's possible for anyone to be able to say, you know, we've got the expertise on every single area.
Do you know how I described your job to my children the other day? You're basically like a GP, right? Take this in the kind of like heart that it said, that you cannot understand and have a kind of in-depth knowledge of all of these issues, right? So you have to just know a little bit about so loads of things to be able to then refer to, I don't know, what the people that deal with policy and governments, what are they called?
Civil servants?
That.
Those guys.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They know. So then you kind of go to them to kind of like be led by and kind of, do you know what I mean?
But not just the civil servants, communities and groups and schools and people, you know, these are the things that we need to be able to embed. And I think when something comes from the grassroots, that's how you are able to win hearts and minds with it. That's how you're able to bring people on a journey. That's how you get buy-in for it. And some of the most powerful campaigns I've seen, that's how they've started. But your job as a politician is to make sure that they are, you know, these big issues of the day, that you're working with your communities to get those answers, and that you're doing what's in your power to do all the structural things that I talked about at the beginning, because that's how you get the long-lasting change that you need.
I think that's really interesting. Thank you. And it kind of leads on to our second question, where obviously you're going to be receiving challenges from people whose passions lie in other areas. We're obviously hugely passionate about the environmental and biodiversity crisis. There'll be somebody that's talking to you about the housing crisis, about shortage of doctors, about shortage of hospitals. And so we met in a previous podcast with Tom from Kent Wildlife Trust, who spoke to us about the fact that the UK is one of the world's most nature depleted countries, and that Kent is facing an Armageddon of insects and pollinators. And with so much of Gillingham and Rainham's wildlife habitat being lost to development, how do you plan to recognise and mitigate the impact of meeting the needs of things like the housing crisis, and the impact that has on nature and wildlife?
So again, I think think I mentioned earlier that my background was in housing and homelessness. So I've been working in that sector for a long time. And I really do understand and appreciate the need to have, I think housing is a right, and I think everyone should have a right to have a home and a place to call their home.
So should wildlife. If I'm challenging you back in a kind of...
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you at all on that. I'm just saying that that's kind of where the fundamental principle around housing comes for me. So I think for me, it's something that I care about. However, to come on to your point, I don't think that should be at the cost of everything else. So I think we have to be really recognise that there are big challenges that come with development, and we've got to find ways to support that. So, particularly where we do have ecosystems divert by, wildlife, we've got to be so careful about just saying we're going to ramroad in housing into those areas. We've got to take that seriously. And again, it comes down to that expert advice. So it is tough in the UK because as you've just mentioned, we've got big challenges with land space and actually nature. I've seen sites before that at one point were classified as brownfield because they had an army barracks on them, and a few years later nature's reclaimed it, and actually that's really powerful. So we can't just say that there is no space for this, and at any cost we've got to make sure that housing and homelessness or development is the priority. I think we've got to look at this in the round. So for me, I don't think they necessarily always have to be at loggerheads with each other. I think if you can find a way, and if you can look for those opportunities to work together, particularly get that expert advice, look at those sites that genuinely, how do we capitalise on where we already have development, so we're not infringing on those, more on those areas that are either greenfield or already have like a brilliant wildlife habitat. How can we make sure that we protect it as much as possible? I'm going to be honest with you though, I don't think it's easy. I think there is challenges in this area, but you've got to be able, the number one starting point has to be that you see it as important, and sometimes I think that gets lost in the conversation.
And also I guess kind of like get a little bit creative. I think for me sometimes, I think especially here, I've lived in Medway like all my life. Like you, I was probably a bit younger. I think I got to about 15 and thought, I'm leaving. I'm not ever going to come back. I didn't. I've stayed here forever. But the thing that kind of comes back to me all the time is about this lack of like being creative around like ideas and ways that you can like tackle problems. And I was with somebody yesterday, I think it was like somewhere from Birmingham actually, and they are trialling this like co-housing. And I just sat there in awe, like listening to this guy, and he was like, we don't even know if it's going to work. Like we've seen other councils that have done co-housing and it's been an absolute
So by co-housing,
shambles.
is this where they share a communal
building
space?
And communal space and like outdoor area and stuff. And he was saying we don't even know if it's going to work, but we are like committed to getting creative around our space and kind of, and I don't know if that's an answer. I don't know much about it, but I just think we can't just look at going, okay, we're just going to build a whole bunch of new builds. We need to get creative around the buildings that we've already got and all of that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. And we've got to look at lots of different things. We have lots of empty properties as well. How do we bring those back into use? How can we already use the assets that we've got? As you say, it's not just about saying, well, we'll just come in and bulldoze over lots of, spaces that have been used by people. And I think sometimes the narrative has got into that space because there's a lot of pressure to build and we're not necessarily having those conversations in a creative way. And I do think often what you do find in politics, but perhaps more government, is that there's one way of doing things and people become embedded with that idea of how you do things, and it takes time to get new ideas in. And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier about working with communities, working with different organisations to look at different ways and opportunities to do things, being creative and seeing if there are ways that rather than just doing everything like we've always done, can we try new things? And that's one thing that I think, as well as standing for Parliament, I'm also a councillor. And that's one thing that as Medway Council, we've really been keen to try and find new ways of doing things. And we've only been in charge of the council for a year, but going forward, it's absolutely one of those areas where we're constantly thinking, what are the different ways that you can do this? And we've talked a lot about biodiversity, climate change, underpinning the decisions that we take, because it's so important and it's not necessarily always been that way. So giving it that status that it needs has to be part of the conversation when you're trying to do things.
Do you want to live more sustainably, but you just don't know where to start?
Did you, like me, sign up for Veganuary and accidentally buy chicken sausages on day 2?
Does the whole eco thing leave you feeling confused and sometimes overwhelmed? If so, this is the podcast for you.
Remember to check us out on our socials on Facebook and Instagram, the Rainham Eco Hub. Linking to housing is kind of like air quality. Like, you are probably aware, we've got like 5 AQMAs in Medway. And if I just read you this, right? So Rainham has been an AQMA since 2010. And whilst car emissions are generally improving, the volume and size of vehicles slow moving through our town centre is obviously getting worse. And at the time of this recording, which is the 5th of June, we have been gridlocked in Rainham for pretty much like a week, and it has been 1 week it'll be all right, and then the next week it's all back again, and it's an absolute nightmare. We are a through town, so we get an awful lot of through traffic, and so I guess one of the questions is, how will you mitigate against the impact of this in the development of the new local plan?
I think, again, this is a really important point. So I was just on the A2 now, and again, as you say, it's been like this for ages, and there are a few different things that play into why that gridlock is happening. So first of all, the A2 is one, and Lower Rainham Road, they're essentially the 2 roads that you can use to access and get cut through. The issues we've had on the M2 haven't helped at all, and then obviously there's been roadworks, and we can talk about whose responsibility that is, but there have been roadworks again which have created huge challenges. And if I'm honest, I think it's one of the big cases around looking at whether development in this part of the town can really work at all, because I don't think that those roads can take much more pressure from housing development, given what's already been happening here. So I think any local plan would have to really, really seriously look at the pressures around traffic and what that then means for air quality, because we've talked a lot about taking this seriously, but if you want to take it seriously, then you have to actually put the actions there as well, and that means sometimes taking some difficult decisions. And I think any local plan will have to really understand and look at that. For me, I don't know how realistic it would be to say that this area could take any more of those pressures given what we're already seeing, and that's from a position of transport, but also from the air quality issues that you've just mentioned as well. And the other thing that we've really got to take seriously in Medway is public transport. There aren't, I don't think many people feel they have those options around them. But looking at, for example, our bus fleet, how we can make that more environmentally friendly, all of these decisions need to be thought about in the round, because if people constantly rely on their car, then we will continue to have these problems in the future as well. So, but at the minute, there aren't many other options around it. So people feel like, don't have a choice if I want to get from A to B. So this has to be part of a wider strategy around looking at public transport, particularly how we can get more efficient and green types of energy used, and people feel more confident using, for example, the buses to get from A to B rather than jumping in the car.
It's so interesting because we've had quite a number of podcasts which have talked about air quality from an environmental perspective and how quickly that crosses over and we start talking about public health, asthma patients, hospital admissions, strokes, all those kind of things. And then we swap over again and we're talking about air quality, and very quickly we're having a conversation about children walking to school, childhood obesity, connecting with families, getting people off the phones and those kind of things. And so often, as you're saying, looking at this in the round, there is so much more to the environmental conversation than just how we don't put more cars on the road because air quality is bad. And I guess from our perspective, we hear time and time again, don't we, how environmentalism and social issues just go hand in hand, and looking through the lens of an environmental lens, how so many other boxes get ticked.
100%. And actually, when you look at some of the issues that we have around mental health and physical health, actually being outdoors in green space, enjoying the outdoors, enjoying good quality air, it's all part of that mix in terms of the impacts on our health as well. And when we look at the stats around air quality, you've already listed some of the big challenges that presents. It's a huge problem. And I'm actually really quite scared by some of the figures that I've seen for Gillingham and for Rainham.
It's right.
And really bad. And I don't think it's been talked about strongly enough, actually. It has to be a priority because, as you say, it impacts so much more of our life. And I think you're absolutely right. This is about what does it mean in the round, and mental health, physical health, all interconnected with how we access the outdoors, how we access the air around us, and the space that is around us. And I think what we're currently doing and how things currently are isn't working anymore. So this needs a stronger strategic approach, and that has to come from not just some people talking about it, but everybody being part of that conversation.
100%.
I'm so glad that you brought up the buses, because our bus system, I have no words. Like, I genuinely have no words. We've had so many conversations with people we don't have in Rainham. If people are listening who are not currently living in Rainham, we don't have like a big supermarket, right? We have like a small supermarket that is overpriced than the big one up the road, and we don't have access. So if you don't have a car, right, you are reliant on an Uber driver, still a car, but you can't get a bus because they're just not reliable. And you've got like 5 kids, you ain't going to go traipsing all the way up to Gillingham Business Park to go and get your shopping. Like, it genuinely comes down to like real everyday sort of issues, and I think that people just forget that. Do you know what I mean? That not everybody has got access to a car or to be able to afford to pay for an Uber. How do you even unpack that when you are struggling, I guess, with money? Do you know what I mean? To pay a provider to come and provide a local transport.
So Labour have been really strong on buses. They want to nationalise and look at how we can make bus travel so much more affordable, because it isn't working as it currently is. And, the problem that we have is that we're dealing with one, and I'm going to say this, and I mean, we've got...
Say it, just say it.
We've literally got a monopoly when it comes to buses. One company really, if we're honest with ourselves, who get to decide, and the council have control over some routes, but not all bus routes. And what they'll say is, this is what happens, some people, if we run this bus route, no one jumps on the bus, so why bother? And quite often what you're finding is people are saying buses don't turn up.
Yep.
So they've been waiting there for hours and not there. They're really expensive. They can't afford to take their whole family on the bus because it feels really expensive, or it's just too unreliable, or it's just not, they feel kind of like they haven't modernised enough to deal with the way people live in their lives. So some people have still been refused if they don't have cash, for example. It's not okay. And this is the problem that we've got, because the private companies that run them are constantly running them for profit. There is no, that their answer to this will be, well, no one wants to use it. But it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, because people don't use them because they don't feel they can rely or trust on them, and that culture hasn't embedded. Whereas if you do look at the capital, where people have much better access in London to public transport, they are more likely, they do use it. Fewer people own cars because they have strong public transport around them that they can access. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to be able to replicate that, and you've already talked about some of the challenges around finances in its entirety, but a very simple thing like having a bus company that is affordable, that is running, that is reliable, could make a massive difference in how people engage and use it, and they're probably more likely to start using those bus services, and that then starts to kind of change the culture around car travel. So we do have to look at this really seriously, and some of that will come from the council, but the council doesn't have control over all of this. It does have to have something quite radical from national government, so I'm pleased Labour's talking about that.
That's really good.
Thank you. Good. It's our final question. So on the 20th of April 2021, 265 MPs voted with the government to reject an attempt to toughen up the approach to discharging sewage into the Season River in the UK. And our current sitting MP for Gillingham and Rainham voted to allow sewage to be discharged. How would you vote in a similar vote if you were MP?
I think this is disgraceful. We need to get tougher on sewage dumping and on water companies. And I recently, actually, I've been invited to go for a swim with them, and I still haven't quite braved it. But Medway Blue Tits, who go swimming down in the cold water, so brave.
They're at the Strand.
They're at the Strand. Yeah. And this is one of the number one issues that has been raised time and time again. We don't even really know what's happening in some of our waters. And quite frankly, I'm disgraced that vote, that 265 MPs thought it was okay.
Just help me understand this, right? Because I feel like this is part of the politics that I just don't get, right? Is it a case of someone says, right, everybody put your hands up if you think it's okay to dump crap in the water, and everyone goes, yeah, all right. I don't like.
Surely that wasn't what happened, right?
No, but help me understand. How does that work? I know you haven't been there yet. I know you've not been elected, but like, what is the process? Or do they ask the question in a way that there's a whole load of stuff behind it? Like, what the heck is that about?
So I haven't seen that particular debate in detail, so I don't know what happened and what the reasons were behind it. But ultimately, with any vote in Parliament, there'll be a big debate and people will have views either way. Now, what's influencing those discussions, what sits behind it, what evidence they're presented with, will depend on each debate. But I mean, when you put it like that, it just doesn't make sense. Now, any decision that's taken will have an impact on somebody. So, for example, the sewage dumping one, the ones that are getting away with it at the minute are the water companies. They are getting away with doing this, and I don't know. Perhaps there's a reason why, or there's something to do with what.
Do they have relevance and influence over those votes?
They wouldn't have. I mean, they wouldn't have direct influence over those, but I'm sure they would have run campaigns about and spoken to people about, why you shouldn't vote in favour.
Because do you know
sure
what
that potentially could have happened. Now, whether that's, I'm not pointing any fingers or anything,
No.
so I don't know exactly.
It helps people understand, because
but they will of course have a view on it, and they will of course talk to decision makers about how it will impact them and what impact, and that may play into how certain people take a vote. I don't know.
It just blows my mind. Like, Liz knows this, and people that regularly listen know that water is like a massive anxiety for me. Like, Southern Water put out these things all the time saying we're in a water stressed area. Like, how, right? We're in 2024 and you're telling me I live in Kent in England and you're telling me we live in a water stressed area. Like, it makes me proper anxious. You can hear in my voice, like, how? What the heck? How is that? And then yet they're allowed to not invest money in their infrastructure to make sure the bloody water don't leak in the first place. Like, I don't understand that. And how earlier I said about empowering communities to be able to have a voice and to be able to take action on stuff like that. And absolutely, I think they've got space in that, but there needs to be then that bigger picture piece above us, right, that says, actually, we're with you and we are not voting for water companies to make a mint out of your money that you pay.
I mean, this is not Labour Party national policy, so I just want to put that on the record. And I'm not necessarily somebody who goes, oh, let's just have everything run by government and let's nationalise everything. That's not my view. But I genuinely think I do not understand how a water company runs for profit.
It's mad, isn't it?
It doesn't make sense. And this is the problem. They haven't invested because they are there for they're there for their shareholders. They're not there. And every year, what this means is that we've had chronic underinvestment in the water structures that we've got in. They'll say that they've done enough work on this and so on, but when you look around you, you can see it everywhere. We've got leaks happening all the time. We've got huge problems with sewage dumping. They're not playing by the rules. They're not playing by the books. And
you can't change company. You can't go to someone else, could you, to vote with your feet?
That's my annoyance. Like, if I've got bad Wi-Fi, I'll go to a different provider. Do you know what I mean? Well, I haven't got that option with water. No. And there are people up and down the country, and kudos to them, that are basically refusing to pay their water bill. Now, I'm not suggesting that encouraging people
I can't
to
advocate
do
that one.
She is a little bit.
But do you know what I mean? My mum would. My mum is absolutely, no, I'm not paying it. Like, no, I'm not absolutely. You tell me then what you can do, because I'm not buying into this. Absolute.
And this is the problem we've got, isn't it? When everything is breaking under this kind of, and companies like some of the water companies we've got have had this monopoly for years and years and years, and they've got away with it. And actually, okay, if we're not going to nationalise them, let's fine them really heavily so it actually makes a difference to them when they go and do things like dump sewage. Because at the minute, they pay the fines, it barely touches the surface of what they're doing.
But when they've got 265 mates saying that that's okay anyway, that the fine is kind of a bit of a gesture anyway, isn't it?
Exactly that. Honestly, I think that this has to be looked at again, because and it's one of the biggest challenges it's one of the challenges that we face when we look at our environment. We want to feel that we've already got big challenges in this country. We've already got big issues when it comes to climate. This feels like we're letting them get away with it.
Yeah.
And that's not okay. And I also just, as you say, I just don't really understand how we can think that sewage dumping is okay.
I just don't
understand
get
what
my brain around it. I don't. It was my birthday, right? Last August. Tell you a little story, right? I booked a little hut down at Whitstable because Whitstable is one of my most favourite places in the whole wide world. And I thought, I love swimming in the sea. So I thought what I'll do before I go is I'll check the night before to make sure that they've not discharged any sewage, right? And it was looking all right before I went to bed. I woke up in the morning, I thought, just double check, because I've got like 50 people coming down for a party on the beach, how lovely. And from 12:20 that night until 8:20 when I woke up in the morning, they'd already discharged 3 times, right? In a space of what time I've gone to sleep, do you know what I mean, 8 hours. And I thought, oh, that's just a bit disappointing, but screw them, I'm still going to go anyway. So I went down. By the time that I'd left and I'd got there at lunchtime, they'd discharged another 4 times. By the time that I'd left there in the evening at 9 o'clock, they had discharged 18 times from 12 at night until 9 o'clock the next evening. And all of my friends were like, I'm not going in there. I'm not doing it. And I was like, they are not ruining my birthday and I am going in the sea. And I went in and I kept my head above the water, and every time I saw some bubbles floating along, I got back out. I know it's disgusting. Like, honestly, your face, you're like, this is absolutely gross. But do you know what? I was like, this is not okay. Like, this is my bloody birthday. But that happens if you look on Surfers Against Sewage. They've got an app where you're able to check the discharges, and you can record if you get illnesses after you've been in the sea and all this sort of stuff. Blows my absolute mind that I had to check the bloody water before we went in.
But we've got a public health crisis, and then you've got an opportunity for 50 people to go swimming in Whitstable Sea for their well-being, their mental health, their physical health, and yet it's filled with shit discharged by
literally.
Literally.
But that has happened, hasn't it? In the recent last couple of weeks, there has been a public health crisis in the sense that so many people have got ill because the water's been contaminated.
But what I mean, aside from associated with the water, just in terms of mental health, physical health, I thought that people have got an opportunity on an island to swim around the island, and that's been taken away in the name of kind of profit for water companies.
And that's exactly it. When you know, I think this is the thing, we can fluff it up how we want to, but essentially what you've said there is right. That's what's happening. I
can say it, you can't because you're on the campaign trail.
Well, I mean, I don't know why I can't say it, because that's what's happening, you know.
This
is just, essentially, you've got water companies that are profiting from this and they're not doing their bit to help us, our environment and our country.
It's rough.
And it's not fair and it's not right. And I don't really understand how there's even a debate about why this is okay or not. But yes, I think this has got to be something that we've got to look at. And if I were elected, it's definitely something that I would want to champion.
Thank you.
So just as we are about to close, I'm just thinking there are... you're yet to meet the wonderful people from the Rainham Eco Hub, where there are so many people here locally that are really, really wanting to make a difference, and they are from all different walks of life, right? Different ages. Come to our green drinks, you'll see little Freddie who's
I'm
like
really excited about the green drinks.
Come to green drinks, yeah, of course you can. Of course you can. We've got Freddie who's like 3, and then you've got like Leon who's like 80. We've got a whole like breadth of people that come along and just roll up their sleeves and kind of just do their best. And I kind of guess for them, what is your lasting message that you kind of want to say to them, that this is what you are going to kind of do and champion in the name of them, basically, to say this is what you care about for the environment and this is what you're going to do in Gillingham and Rainham?
Well, there's so many things that we've talked about today, but for me, as I said at the start of this, like, I think this has to be our number one priority. And what I want to do, I'd love to meet them. So I'd love to hear directly from them in terms of, you know, what do they want to see from their member of parliament? How do they want to make sure their voice is amplified? So we talked a little bit about that. But the one thing that I would always promise to do is some of these big campaigns that we've talked around, particularly around sewage, making sure that we highlight the big challenges that we face, both here when it comes to climate change, air quality, that I am championing that from the front. You know, I'm not afraid to have those big discussions. And I think that's a bit that we've had, I think it's been missing, and we don't have enough politicians talking about it. So that would be my pledge, that certainly on those big issues, I want to be leading from the front. But I'd also like to meet with them, talk to them, and keep the communication going. I think it's really important to have that dialogue, to learn, to get new ideas, all the things we could be doing differently, all the stuff that we've talked about today. Your Member of Parliament and your politicians should be open to those discussions. They should be open to having those conversations, and they should be open to listen and learn from the people they represent. And that's what I promise to do.
That's really kind. And you're, of course, invited first Monday of every month to Green Drinks. However, I think you're probably going to be quite busy on the first week in July.
Yeah, I think so, possibly.
Possibly the one in August if you're elected.
But if I were to be elected, I'd love to come along if I'm welcome.
Of course. Thank you so much for coming. It has been really interesting and lovely to meet you. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a really nice chat, actually. I've really enjoyed it.
And don't have too much cake on this campaign trail because it's not good for your teeth.
Not good for your teeth.
I will remember that next time someone offers me some cake.
Shoves you some cake in your face. Thank you so much.
But it's still better than a swim in the sea, right?
That's true. Thank you.
We hope that you really enjoyed listening to this little mini-series on politics, and that you have also been able to get a little bit more in-depth information to help inform your decision in the next coming general election.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode and asked just 3 things of you to help our podcast grow and help us to learn. So please subscribe and rate the podcast. Please share with your friends and family. And please do follow us and engage on our socials on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and now on TikTok. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next time.
This has been an I Am Listening exclusive podcast. For more information, head over to our website, im-listening.co.uk.